Okay, so we looked at geometric and arithmetic sequences. But what happens if you sum the numbers that come from an arithmetic or geometric sequence? And that's what we're going to look at today. All right, so there's this dude named Carl Friedrich Gauss, and this is a very, very famous story. Honestly, they're not quite sure if it really occurred, but at this point, so what? So he was living, I think, in Bavaria, just north of Switzerland in southern Germany. And he was in a little schoolhouse where they would have mixed grades. So the kindergartners, third grades, eighth grades were all in the same class. And he was brilliant. He was very precocious. And so he would get bored and act out. And the professor got annoyed with him one day and said, Friedrich, go in the back of the room and add the numbers 1 to 100. And the professor said, that'll keep him occupied for an hour. He came back in 2 minutes, had the answer. This is what he did. Now, again, I'm going to share this story, but honestly, we're not quite sure if this really happened. It's a nice story. Okay? So we have the sum, and I'll label that S. And so what we want to do is we want to add the numbers 1 to 100. Right? And so back in the 1700s, there was no calculators. You had only one choice to add this manually. So the teacher thought, that would keep it occupied for a good while. So, Mr. Gauss was a genius. So he noticed that if you reverse the order of the numbers, you're still summing the same numbers. That doesn't change anything. It's still going to get the same sum. And then he noticed, well, if you add these two, you'll get twice the sum. And notice what happens when you add. You always get 101. So how many 101s do we have? Well, there were 100 numbers. So there's 100 101s. Now I'm going to leave it unsimplified for a reason. Okay? The reason this works is because since it's arithmetic, if you go up by 1 for the top sum, on the bottom sum you're going to go down by 1. So it compensates. Plus 1 minus 1, plus 1 minus 1, plus 1 minus 1, plus 1 minus 1. And when you look at this formula, or this calculation, notice what the 101 means. The 101, that's the first plus the last term. And what's the 100? Well, that's how many terms there are. Okay? Now, again, this story that I told you, you can see right here, Google is putting that there because it's a common thing. And this is a cool site if you're curious, MathBits Notebook. But okay, so that's for an arithmetic sequence. And we're going to use that now. Now, notice that if you go ahead and substitute for the first term, or my bad, the last term, this formula, you create an alternative formula. So if you don't know the last term, but you know the constant difference in the first term, if you substitute this formula for the last term, that's where this alternative formula comes from. And it depends upon what you're doing.